Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern wrapped up her 5-day trip to Australia with smiles and optimism about future Trans-Tasman relations. However, critics are still wondering whether there will be any meaningful change under Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Bridget Morton joins us now.
Good to be here.
You're one of those critics?
I was originally. I'm definitely much more optimistic than I was. I think the Prime Minister got some good wins there in terms of a change direction possibly on 501s and getting some options on the table around a pathway to citizenship for Kiwis living in Australia. Those things are pretty massive, and most of us thought there was going to be little change.
So what actually happened last week, aside from the handshakes and smiles?
So essentially on 501s, this is, the criminals with most of them having no connection to New Zealand, having grown up in Australia, being deported here. They've caused us massive issues in terms of gang numbers and in our prisons. But for those people, now Albanese is saying what he quotes as a more common sense approach. So seemed to indicate that if one of these people didn't have connections back to New Zealand, that they wouldn't be deported in the same way. So there's a little bit to see how that actually rolls out and whether or not that actually stops the flood of 501s coming over the border. But it looks positive and much more positive than we thought. The other key one is around Kiwis living in Australia. So we've always had this quite imbalanced position where Australians living here are able to get sort of a pathway to residency and then citizenship and all of the benefits that come with that. But for Kiwis in Australia, essentially they're on this quite strange, special, temporary visa, and they're not able to even get on a pathway to residency, and that's caused a lot of problems for Kiwis living over there.
So Albanese's language appears to be stronger than Morrison's?
Oh, without a doubt. Morrison was like, particularly on 501s, there was no chance of that changing under the Liberal government, so this is a significant change. In terms of the Kiwis living over there, there was a little bit of, maybe we could look at something under the previous Liberal government, but no moves, and this is a commitment to having options on the table by Anzac Day next year.
There was a strong business delegation too with the Prime Minister. What will they get out of it?
So there seemed to be really positive reception from the businesses that did go over there. These are some of our sort of more high profile, our Sharesies, those type of companies that we're really proud of and really proud to profile on the world stage. So they seem to, really grow connections, have a really good interaction, I think, there was quite a few ministers with the Prime Minister as well, and that seemed to all go positively. A little bit different story, I think, and we shouldn't ignore that that's not what's happening for businesses, let's say, left behind, not on that delegation. A lot of those businesses are still struggling here.
Will this drive up business activity between both nations?
Let's hope so. Let's hope that the purpose of those delegations is to open those doors, allow more of those conversations to happen. So you would hope that some of those businesses created some of those relationships, even within the delegation, as well as with all of the sort of Australian counterparts that they met.
Given two-way trade's worth about $22 billion a year,
it's our
I want to boost that.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's our second biggest trading partner. So it makes sense for us to build that as much as possible. And we've got some great things to export here. We should be using that and getting them to our closest market.
What about tourism?
Well, yes, absolutely. We want all the tourists to come back, and Australian tourists have always been great to come, particularly during the school holidays. I think we've got some tourism businesses struggling at the moment, though, to staff, but of course that's hopefully a short-term issue, and in the long term we want to get back at that pattern of being a destination of choice for Australians.
So it sounds like you're less pessimistic than you were before the trip.
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt. I was very pessimistic about anything really changing. Absolutely proven wrong on a couple of points there.
But more conversations will need to be had. It's just a one-week trip.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're in this sort of golden era where Albanese's in his first 100 days. He's got, we all know when politicians first come in, there's a lot of, handshakes and smiles, as you put it. And then they've got to get down to the hard work and start balancing the domestic political situation as well. So it may be great that we got these wins now, but they do need to follow through.
And Albanese's domestic situation may change his tone, attitude down the track.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we can probably be optimistic that he will change on the position on climate change, the independence that he has to work with to maintain government, like they are going to push him quite hard on that. So I think that's quite certain. I think, in terms of how New Zealand is treated, there's not a lot of domestic voting power behind those initiatives. So the ability for him to walk away domestically is quite easy to do.
Well, that leads us nicely into the Pacific Island Forum this week. How will Australia and New Zealand unite on things like climate change?
Well, I think, we've seen from the Pacific Island Forum countries other than Australia and New Zealand, the main thing they keep saying over and over again is they want, action and commitment on climate change. And in particular, they wanted Australia to actually start acting on climate change because they see the effects of that on their nations. So I think we, really got to see Australia and New Zealand working together. They've already made some, had some conversations around the role of China, but they need to be careful that they're not seen as, the big bullies in the region, and just treating these other Pacific countries as their sort of backyard.
How is the relationship between New Zealand, Australia and the islands at the moment, do you think?
Well, I think it's very nuanced, and there's a lot of countries there, and there's a lot of interrelationships between the Pacific countries that we're not involved in, and you can see that playing out at PIF this week. Kiribati, they left the forum just on the sort of eve of the starting of it. So I think, for them, New Zealand, we know we've discussed previously that our foreign minister here has not spent as much time there as she should have over the last couple of years. So I think there's a little bit of person-to-person rebuilding that needs to happen.
What does this mean for Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern getting back overseas? How will that improve her image?
Well, I think we've seen mostly for the polling that her travelling overseas does little to affect her domestic polling here. I think people, for the most part, see that she does a lot of good things on the world stage, and she's someone that we're quite proud of on the world stage. But there's also a feeling that that's not really affecting most people on the ground. Going back to that business, example before, those companies that went on the delegation, but, for your cafe down the street that's short of staff and has been struggling for the last couple of years. Inflation, they're not going to feel that same sort of warm glow from Jacinda Ardern's foreign trips. So I think obviously it's something she needs to do, it's something she's good at, but it's not something that wins votes.
Bridget Morton, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.